Part 2. The Masque of the Red Death of Poe. Lo, 'tis a gala night, within the lonesome latter years, the conqueror worm. A masquerade, mask, music, chandeliers, and waiting in the wings, the final actor, death. For Poe, this wasn't fantasy. This was autobiography. Every cough, every clock, every corpse in a ball gown. It was his household, his wife, his life. Tonight, the Annals return to the ballroom. To the plague, the poverty, the politics, and the shame that brought Edgar Allan Poe to his own Red Death. Welcome to One Up the Annals. I'm your host, Rab Greason. And tonight, Edgar Allan Poe, Part 2, The Masque of the Red Death of Poe. A little disclaimer, Poe style. Beware the scroll of plague and wine, of brides too young in borrowed time, of ballots rigged, of bottles drained, of masks and worms, of souls profaned. If you came for comfort, flee this floor. The library waits with tales that snore. But if you crave the grave once more, step through the coffin's tilted door. This is One Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend, and tonight, the Red Death joins the masquerade. Edgar Allan Poe, let's go! Act 1. The Ballroom of Shame. A masquerade. The hall is crowded, the air is thick with perfume, dancing, and lies. 1,000 masked figures twirl, laugh, and drink while outside, death waits at the gates. The wine flows, the music roars, but beneath it all, a clock ticks the truth, reminding them the dance cannot last forever. That's the Masque of the Red Death, a tale where no lock, no wall, no costume keeps the plague away. At midnight, it always finds the door. But for Poe, Masque wasn't fantasy, it was autobiography written in allegory. Because while he was inventing American horror, teaching us to fear shadows, to count our heartbeats, to hear the raven at the door, he was also dancing his own masquerade. He was the critic in the mask, lashing out with his quill like a dagger, the social climber in borrowed clothes, drinking at the party he could never afford, the desperate widower, chasing marriage proposals like lottery tickets, hoping one might buy him security. The late 1840s weren't candlelit genius. They were a ballroom of debt and rivals. The clock toiled in his house as well. Coughs from the next room, gossip at the door, editors counting coins in the hall. And when the clock finally struck midnight in Baltimore, Poe didn't just write the mask. He walked into it. Next, his story begins not with triumph, but with a man running out of masks to wear. Act 2. The Tomahawk Man. They called him the Tomahawk Man, not because he carried an axe, but because when Edgar Allan Poe wrote a review, somebody's career got scalped. Poe wasn't just America's first goth, he was America's first literary troll. And let me tell you, he was viciously good at it. He once opened a review with this: "We regret that we can say nothing good of this book, not even that it is bad enough to be amusing." That's not critique, that's a drive-by shooting with a quill. Another literary scalped victim, a poet named William Ellery Channing. He called the man's verses beneath criticism, and that they read like the insane ravings of a madman. And when he took aim at Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, America's golden boy of Boston, Poe accused him of plagiarism. The man has stolen, and what is worse, he has no talent to conceal the theft. That's not just calling him a thief, that's calling him a bad thief. The kind who leaves fingerprints on the corpse. The Boston literati were horrified. They called Poe jealous, bitter, unstable, and maybe he was, but they still read him. People bought magazines just to watch Poe swing the tomahawk. It was literary blood sport, and Poe knew what sold. Shame sold, and he made it an art form. The drunk at the ball. Of course his enemies had plenty of ammo to swing back. Poe supplied it himself. He was a notorious lightweight. One glass of wine and he was wrecked. But he kept drinking, and kept doing it in public, and the results were humiliating. Passed out in taverns, hauled off the street by police, lectures canceled because he was too drunk to speak. In Richmond, he tried to join the city's temperance movement, swearing off alcohol forever. Within weeks, he was back in the bottle and back in the gossip pages. This is the imp of the perverse in action, Poe's self-destructive streak. Whenever stability was within reach, he'd burn it to the ground himself. He wasn't just haunted by ravens, he was haunted by hangovers too. The lover and the loser. And then came the love life. After Virginia's illness, Poe went on a spree of desperate proposals. Widows, wealthy patrons, admirers, he'd propose marriage to anyone who might offer financial salvation, then scare them off with his paranoia and his drinking. He once juggled 2 engagements at the same time, one in Providence and one in Richmond. Both women found out, both dumped him. Poe's reputation as a scandalous, unstable suitor spread faster than his poems. The cruel irony? For a man obsessed with young, dying women, when he finally sought stability, he chased it away like a con, and always lost. The imp of the perverse. Professionally, he was no better. Every time he had success, editing the Southern Literary Messenger, Graham's Magazine, the Broadway Journal, he'd make the magazine more popular, then sabotage himself with demands, feuds, or drunken blow-ups. He later wrote an essay about this tendency, called it the imp of the perverse. He described it as a voice that whispers to you at the worst possible moment. Do the thing that will ruin you, because you can. And that voice ruled his life. The shame ledger. So by the late 1840s, Poe wore a dozen masks. The critic, the genius, the widower, the drunk, the suitor, the editor, and the troll. But beneath every mask was the same face. Broke, angry, desperate, lusting for money, lusting for validation, lusting for women to fill the grave Virginia left behind. A man too clever for his own good, lashing out at the masquerade around him. Poe, the tomahawk man, could cut down every rival in the ballroom, but he could never cut his way out of his own shame. My favorite blonde has a favorite Poe story. Not the Raven, not Annabel Lee, but the Masque of the Red Death. So this one's for Victoria. Act 3. The Masque of the Red Death. If Poe taught us anything, it's that every masquerade ends with a corpse. The Masque of the Red Death isn't a story, it's a confession wearing makeup. Prince Prospero and his nobles locked themselves inside an abbey, drinking, dancing, pretending the plague outside doesn't exist. They light the chandeliers, drown the fear in champagne, but the clock keeps tolling, and death waits for its cue. At midnight, a masked figure steps through the door, tall, gaunt, crimson spattered. And by dawn, everyone who tried to hide behind silk and wine lies cold on the marble floor. It was supposed to be a parable, but for Poe it was a diary entry. He first titled it The Masque, M-A-S-K, of the Red Death. Then he changed it to Masque, M-A-S-Q-U-E. Not just a face covering, but a performance. Because death, in his world, always had an audience. And maybe he was writing satire. And in the cholera years, while cities drowned in disease, the rich literally threw masked balls to hide from contagion. Upstairs, velvet mask, champagne toast. Outside, bodies in the streets. It's like 19th century billionaires hosting yacht parties during COVID. What makes Poe's Red Death more horrific is that it wasn't tuberculosis. TB, the disease killing Virginia in his own house, was slow, lingering, even fetishized by Victorian society as a beautiful, wasting illness. But in Masque, death doesn't seduce, it explodes you. Blood pours from your pores. Seizures strike in minutes, and every cough from her was a minute off that ebony clock. In Prospero's palace, it isn't just a fortress, it's built like a psychedelic death trip. 7 rooms, each a different color, ending in a black chamber with red windows, like walking through a haunted carnival toward your own coffin. To the world, he was a Gothic writer. At home, he was Prince Prospero, trying to wall off death with poetry and prayer, writing beauty while decay sat at the piano. And when he wrote, "And darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all," he wasn't describing a kingdom. He was describing his living room. Poe didn't lust for life, he lusted for decline. For the corpse that outlasts the kiss. For grief he could polish into rhyme and sell for $4 a page. That's the real Masque, not allegory, but confession. Poe dancing with his own Red Death, hoping the music would never stop. And the last echo of the 12th stroke died away, and then, as if from a dream, there appeared in the room a figure, tall and gaunt, shrouded head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask upon the face resembled the countenance of a stiffened corpse, and the garments were dabbled in blood, his brow besprinkled with the scarlet horror. And when Prospero's eyes fell upon the spectral guest, he trembled with a terror no mask could hide, for the Red Death had entered the masquerade. Act 4, The Cooping of a Corpse Poet. By 1849, Poe was running out of masks. The critic, the widower, the drunk, the suitor, the genius, the troll, every persona he wore was cracking at the edges. He had one last chance at salvation. He reunited with his childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royster, now a wealthy widow. They were engaged, and the future actually looked stable. A home, a fortune, maybe even the comfort he'd chased his whole life. But that's the curse of Poe. Every time salvation knocked, the imp of the perverse answered the door. On September 27, 1849, Poe boarded a steamer in Richmond, bound for New York. He never made it. 4 days later, Baltimore Election Day, the streets drunk on riot and rum, outside a tavern called Gunner's Hall. A man collapsed in the gutter, delirious, muttering, dressed in rags that weren't his own. That man was Edgar Allan Poe. They dragged him to Washington College Hospital. For 4 days he drifted between prayer and madness, sometimes lucid, sometimes raving. He kept calling for someone named Reynolds. No one knows who that was. Ghost, conspirator, the last character his mind ever wrote. He never recovered. On October 7, 1849, at just 40 years old, he whispered his last words. "Lord, help my poor soul." And with that, the masquerade was over. No autopsy, no records. Cause of death, phrenitis. The 19th century way of saying we don't know and it looked bad. The rumors spread faster than the truth. Theory 1, alcohol. Critics claimed he drank himself to death, a tragic drunk, a mad genius in a gutter. But friends swore he was sober when he left Richmond, and Poe was a lightweight anyway. 1 glass and he was wrecked. Theory 2, rabies. A modern doctor studied the symptoms, delirium, hydrophobia, quick decline, and said it fit. Maybe he was bitten by a stray animal. Maybe even his beloved cat, Caterina. Poetic justice or divine irony, either way, the bite was never found. Theory 3, the brain tumor. When his skull was examined decades later, calcified mass was discovered inside. Was the same growth that killed him the one that fed his visions? Theory 4, cooping. Election gangs in Baltimore were known to kidnap men, drug them, dress them in disguises, and force them to vote again and again for bribes and beer. Victims would wake up beaten, robbed, and discarded in the street. And Poe, found on election day outside a polling tavern, in clothes not his own. The first detective of American fiction, killed by a crime no detective could solve. It's almost too perfect, the author of premature burials and Gothic lies, buried by his own myth. Think about it. Poe, the man who invented detective fiction, who wrote of disguises and masks, who exposed every horror of the human soul, reduced to a pawn in a rigged ballot scheme, a body shuffled between polling booths until it collapsed. The final irony. At the moment he was about to rise again, a home, a wife, a legacy, Poe vanished into the shadows. He died in borrowed clothes, his identity stripped like his fortune. The writer who accused others of plagiarism was buried like a man plagiarized from himself. The detective of American literature killed by a case he never solved. 7 people attended his funeral, no music, no poem, no pomp. And then came his enemy, Rufus Griswold, the real Red Death of Poe's legacy. He wrote the obituary that painted Poe as a drunk, a lunatic, a pervert. Forged letters, lied to newspapers, and for decades, America believed him. The man who gave us Ravens and Red Death was buried under fake news. But in the Annals, we give him his eulogy back. Not the pitiful 7 souls who stood at a cold grave, but the millions who still whisper his words in candlelight. Not the critics who mocked his madness, but the sinners and scholars who know that madness was genius in disguise.
October went through empty
But we loved with a love that was more than love, Annabel Lee. And though they call it shame, we know it was devotion, twisted, tragic, unrelenting, a love that survived the flesh, the fever, and the fire, and came back as poetry. Be silent in that solitude which is not loneliness, spirits of the dead. You were never alone, Poe. The ghost you wrote became your congregation. You built a church from despair, and we're all still kneeling in it. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie, thy soul hath spoken. The Raven. They lied about you, called you drunk, cursed, doomed, but your words became the heartbeat of American night. Every horror film, every murder ballad, every shadowed stanza owns you its breath. This tragedy whose name is man, and its hero, the conqueror worm. You faced the worm and laughed. You let the dirt have your body, but you kept the soul for print. The worm devoured the man, but the poet devoured eternity. And so tonight the Annals raise a toast to the orphan who built cathedrals from rot, to the widower who married grief and made it sing, to the addict who sold his agony by the stanza and taught the world that beauty can bloom in decay. You were mocked by preachers, plagiarized by rivals, and buried in borrowed clothes. But time was your true publisher, and time paid you in immortality. Your heart stopped in Baltimore, your pulse never did. It's there, in every shiver, every candle flicker, every lover whispering, nevermore. So rest, old poet. Your house has finally fallen, but your words still walk the halls. You turned shame into scripture, and in these annals, that makes you holy. This is One Up the Annals, where shame becomes legend, and tonight, the legend answers itself. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. A poem for those still here. Once upon an autumn dreary, when the nights grew long and eerie, a poet whispered from the grave that beauty blossoms in decay. We begged him for a lighter theme, a gentler song, a softer dream. But from the dark the echo swore that dreadful word, nevermore. through floorboards cracked in coffin seams, through fevered hearts and haunted dreams. He stitched his grief in rhyme and lore, and sold us sorrow by the score. So raise the scroll, but be aware. The tales within are ill to bear, of lust and shame, of graves and gore, the kind of truths we can't ignore. Good night.